Kelly spoke to that already, so I won't reiterate the point. The views that we present today, or at least the things that we'll be speaking about, will not be those of Astellas. They'll be based on experience that I've had working in the transparency space since back in the day when states such as Maine had transparency laws. And so some of the best practices that we'll share today will be related to not just Astellas, but also other organizations. So first, to help set the context, as most of you know, and I looked at the invite list, a lot of folks here are from both the pharmaceutical and medical device industries. And so the knowledge here should be pervasive. But just to highlight the point, the pharmaceutical industry in particular is being highly scrutinized by the government for quite some time now. All HCP-HCO interactions, as a result, must be reported, and all transfers of value associated with them must be reported to both the federal and to the state governments. The pictures here should be reminiscent of activities that have happened just in the last 6 months or so affecting our industry. On the one hand, Insys Therapeutics, 2 district managers or 2 reps were arrested for charges related to uncompliant or inappropriate relationships with HCPs and kickbacks associated there. And then everyone's, I'm sure, familiar with the EpiPen case. And so these just being cases from the last 6 months really highlight the scrutiny and the emphasis for us to get it right. You know, as a compliance team member here with Astellas, as well as serving in roles with other E&C groups across the country for other manufacturers, it's just really important that we not only have transparent information, but that we report it accordingly. And the OIG has 7 elements of an effective compliance program, areas that we should look at. I present all this introduction because it directly relates to the analytics, right? The data that we receive today, being in the transparency space, is information that is widely available and in some cases publicly available. Now, if the information is publicly available or it's reported to the government, we have a first-line opportunity to be able to review the information and such use it in ways that we can then promote tolerant behavior, compliant behavior, and help drive organization effectiveness. The chart here is one that I like to use to kind of help describe the analytics. You know, analytics, big data, those are terms that are thrown around quite a bit today. And I think it's important to first narrow the definition of analytics and what we're talking about. On this particular chart, you see the value proposition on the y-axis and the difficulty on the x-axis. And so there's really 4 types of analytics. There's descriptive, what happened, right? Describing the information or what you're seeing. Diagnostic, why did it happen? Predictive, what will happen? And then prescriptive, how can we make it happen? And in these 4 types of analytics, for transparency purposes, where we really sit is within the descriptive and diagnostic areas. What happened and why did it happen? And some of the analytics that we'll look at today will help drive conversations around what happened in the past. It's more retrospective looking. Now, some best practices, or as we call them, rules of the road. You know, it's important always to remember that you can use analytics and big data to tell just about any story. You know, I've seen cases where someone has a hypothesis and they go and test it and they go find the sample set that they need to be able to verify or corroborate their story. And in my personal opinion, that is the wrong way to do it. The correct way to do it, and the way that it's important to keep up front, is to develop your key questions initially, all right, to set a hypothesis, to develop control variables, and then from there to be able to test it using the analytics and using the data that you have available to you. In other words, it's not so different than a scientific trial. And that is important to keep in mind because of the fact that big data comes with big risks, and there are also challenges associated with misreporting. From having conversations with key leaders in various organizations around transparency data and analytics associated with it, another best practice that we'll share is just to disclose upfront the limitations of the data. Right? Open payments data is really focused on 6 physician types and healthcare organizations and reporting on those 2 types of entities. And if we think about that and we're doing an analysis on open payments data, then one of the first limitations that should be disclosed up front is related specifically to the fact that this is only for sunshine purposes, and as such only for those HCPs and HCOs that are included for reporting. So again, just some tips and tricks for the road. As we kind of jump into these next areas of analytics, one of the things that I want to highlight is again, the key questions. What are the things that we're trying to answer? And as such, what were the analytics that we developed to be able to help answer that question? So for this particular analysis, when we think about general compliance monitoring, and I think my colleague Kelly also touched on something similar to this, the question here is, are meals provided to HCPs as part of an educational presentation compliant with regulations and policies? And to take it back to the ethics and compliance area, and specifically the pharmaceutical industry and the governance there, the areas that we want to explore compliance with are the Code of Interactions, the company HCP interactions policy, if you have one at your organization, time and expense policy, and then also state-specific legislation, areas such as Minnesota or Massachusetts that may have certain thresholds or caps to conform with. And this type of a chart, is very simply looking for outliers, looking at not just who the HCPs are and the dollar value associated with those educational meals, but then being able to also identify a third dimension, which is the representative that hosted that particular meal. And if we were doing a simple threshold review, we could look at that and say, okay, based on the plot here, the scatter plot, there are 3 areas of concern here. One other thing I'd like to highlight, and Mohammed, you covered this in your intro as part of the transparency conference from August, is what keeps compliance officers up at night. One of the things that I think was inherent to that discussion that may not have been represented in the follow-up areas is the fact that there is quite a bit of pre-work developing these analytics, but there's also a lot of follow-up work. And one of the things that keeps me up at night is the amount of time and energy that our collective team has to spend diving into not just the analytics themselves, that's quite frankly the easy part, but all the follow-up activity there and after. So following up with the reps, understanding why in these cases they exceeded a certain threshold, understanding exactly what the factors were in that, and then if there's corrective information or risk mitigation, there's things that need to be done, all of the work associated therein. So as we continue forward, one thing I'll also highlight as part of these presentations is what are the follow-up activities that compliance teams also have to dive into. Another analysis here that we look at is total HCP spend versus instituted caps. And the key question is, how much has the organization spent on an HCP as compared to set caps? Does the spend breakdown make sense in relation to one another? Areas of governance here, company HCP interactions policy, code of conduct, again, state-specific legislation. And if you're one of the unfortunate organizations who's under a CIA, there are provisions generally embedded within those that also dictate how much and what you can spend on. And so looking at this simple analysis on how much has been spent per HCP, one of the things we're able to deduce immediately is how many dollars and how close are we to the cap. And in this example, HCP 7 is probably pretty close. HCP 3 is coming up. And that's when we want to notify our business partners and let them know exactly where they stand. In addition, though, other areas that we can look at is the vertical comparison. Looking at all the HCPs accordingly, the top 2 have fee-for-service spend, but the other ones do not. Does that make sense, right? Are these key opinion leaders, or are these speakers, or etc.? Are these individuals being engaged, whereas others are not? Is there a reason for that? Is there business justification? Additionally, if we were to look at specific types of spend, such as fee-for-service again, we could also see that there should be corresponding or correlated spend associated with that. And what I mean by that is fee-for-service activities, generally speaking in the pharmaceutical industry, are associated with consulting arrangements. And as part of consulting arrangements, there's generally a need to also bring the HCP out, so there should be travel expenses associated. And so from an ethics and compliance perspective, one of the things that we would look at is not just the total dollars or total spend, but then specifically, does the spend make sense? Are there other areas, other categories of spend that should be represented? And then furthermore, if we really wanted to dive deep, looking at the fee-for-service types of payments and attributing that to the fair market value for the HCP and seeing if that makes sense. And so to bring it all back, one simple analysis or one type of analytics here can help drive a lot of different types of questions and drive a lot of different activities that then the ethics and compliance team can follow up on. A third example of, again, general compliance types of analytics, medical reprint distribution. the key question here, are reprints being distributed to the appropriate audience? Are they being distributed in a consistent and compliant fashion, either by HCP or by territory? This simple table here denotes what types of specialties, physician specialties, are receiving this particular reprint. And then in addition to that, we have also included the rep, or in this case reps that have provided, and the number of reprints that they've provided. And so a couple of things you can do, kind of going back to the key question, are they being distributed appropriately? Are the specialties on label for the product? Very simply, do we have any risk associated with misdistribution? Additionally, the total number of reprints that are being distributed. So in this example, Rep 3 has provided 5 reprints of for the same product to infectious disease specialists. Does that make sense? And if we wanted to dive further into that, we could look at the statistical analysis around those particular distributions. So what is the mean? What is the mode? All the things that we learned about back in algebra that drive conversations around risk and risk management. And then lastly, another area that we could explore also is geographic distribution. Reps are aligned to territories, and as such, they're calling on physicians in those particular territories. Is there anything out of the ordinary when we look at a geographic distribution on where the rep is distributing his or her materials? Does that make sense? In this example, Rep 2 seems to be going all the way up to Sacramento and Los Angeles. Is that potentially of concern? Is that actually Rep 3's territory? So all of these things we can deduce and analyze, and our team could further follow up on. Again, a lot of activities go into post-analysis follow-up, but things that are important. And it just shows you that we can use analytics today for purposes outside of just reporting to the government. Lastly, I do also want to touch on another topic. We talked a little bit about 3 examples around general compliance analytics. Looking at open payments, and Kelly also spoke to this, what are some things that organizations can do now that open payments data is publicly available and out there in the public sphere for consumption? On the one hand, it's great that CMS has published 27 million rows of data. On the other hand, it's extremely difficult for compliance organizations to be able to utilize this information in a fashion that is both meaningful, insightful, and can be acted upon. Right? Those of you who are familiar with the space know that when organizations report, they take into account different rules, different decisions, different assumptions. And so all of those, again, speaking to the best practices, are areas that you'll have to disclose prior to presenting any analyses. Well, let's say, for example's sake, that we're just looking to answer a couple of questions. Are there products within the therapeutic area or the treatment classes for our drug that are receiving similar funding for education, research, or commercial purposes? Or, alternatively, another way to ask the question is, are we devoting too much spend to those particular categories for any one product? In addition, our key opinion leaders that we engage for speaking arrangements, for fee-for-service activities, for consulting, etc., are these KOLs truly being tiered at the correct level? And those in the compliance space know what I'm talking about when I speak to this, but KOLs can be tiered in any number of different levels: national, international, regional, community, etc. And when we look at the pervasiveness that the pharmaceutical industry utilizes a particular HCP, that can be directly correlated to the standing, or in other words, the tiering in which that KOL should be engaged at, which then directly drives the fair market value compensation that he or she receives on an hourly basis. It's not a direct correlation. I won't say it's a negative or positive one, but it's definitely one that you can look at because, as an example, if one of your top KOLs is only being engaged by your organization, then perhaps it makes sense from a risk standpoint to take a deeper dive and look at the criteria in which he or she was evaluated. Right? What are the number of publications? How many years have they been working in this particular space? Is there things that, from the other perspective, if the government were to come in and look at your particular compliance program and the fair market value rates associated with an HCP, are those being paid accurately? Which is always a cause for concern, I know. So these two analyses, very simply put, just looking at the types of physicians and who is engaging them, excuse me, not the types, the individual physicians and other HCPs, who is engaging them, what type of spend and category of spend, research, commercial, education, etc., and then also who is engaging organizations. All of this can help create benchmarking opportunities that compliance departments can then take forward. And from there, again, going back to the scrutiny that the industry is being placed under, helps with mitigation of risk. Lastly, I want to touch on a couple of things related to future analytics. We've talked a little bit today about what organizations are doing, not just from a compliance monitoring perspective, but also from an open payments benchmarking perspective. Here are some other areas to explore, things that I know some of my colleagues in this industry have started to look at and have been successful, relatively speaking, at developing. The first, and really a good example of this, is samples provision. Open payments does require reporting on samples. However, a lot of the organizations that I've spoken with keeps their sample reporting data separate and apart from other types of data that's being collected for transparency reporting. And so by combining the two, you may look at geographic and quantity analyses by representative, by utilization, by HCP, and be able to look at some areas of potential further exploration. So in the previous examples, total spend, right? We wanted to look at samples and include that as part of the category for total spend cap. That's one. Geographic distribution, looking at how many samples he or she, HCP may be receiving as part of their sales calls. That's another area. So things that we can layer on top to continue to look at risk mitigation efforts. And then in addition to that, a lot of companies have begun to really take a hard look at their, what we call here, anti-bribery, anti-corruption vertical. For lack of a better term, it is, generally speaking, an international group within a lot of ethics and compliance departments. FCPA can be enacted and can be enforced on any U.S. company that has affiliates, subsidiaries, or just a presence around the globe. And so if in the recent case, I think Novartis was alleged to have had non-compliant practices in Korea. AstraZeneca and GSK, I believe, had also similar cases of enforcement in China. And so if we think about transparency as a parallel to FCPA violations and enforcement trends, it's important to keep in mind that transparency data can be used in a similar fashion when we're talking globally, right? Risk management, going back to that terminology for ethics compliance organizations, looking at the total spend by geographic area and the risk associated with that. If, for example, going to the cases in China, there was alleged behavior on those companies for kickbacks to physicians who were then in turn prescribing products. If a compliance organization was able to capture and collect that information on the global transparency scale, then they could potentially look at the total dollars being attributed to fee-for-service arrangements, medical meetings, consultant arrangements, etc., even physicians in that particular geographic space, which then may paint a picture and tell a story that would then create more follow-up opportunities. And so as we kind of think about the future of analytics, today's panel or today's discussion is really focused on analytics today. What are some best practices that we can share with you? And I hope it was insightful. But also, what are some future things that we want to do from an E&C perspective? And Kelly and I both represent the organization from that particular department or organization. And so as we think about how we can use analytics for the future, these are ideas that we hopefully will enact very soon. And with that, I just want to thank you again all for your time. And Mohammed, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Ben. If I can get back the screen here in a second, I'll launch mine. So very insightful. Thank you, Ben and Kelly. I want to just quickly tee off from where both Kelly and Ben, you left in terms of what we can do with this data, right? So Kelly, I think you mentioned something around looking at the data before filing, having all the justification and documentation assembled and ready in case there is spend that doesn't look right. Even if it's right, you want to be able to justify it when the questions come in. And I think Ben, to your point in terms of looking at the data is easy, And so I'll take the audience in the next 10 minutes in how easy it is to look at the data. But of course, the hard part of once you've found issues, how do you investigate within your organizations, which systems, which teams you have to work with. I think that will be the harder part. So for today, I wanted to cover 4 specific cases that I think could be very common for compliance organizations. One is around how do you summarize this tremendous amount of data and produce metrics through which either you can provide visibility to your executives or even within the compliance teams, understand your spend and quickly spot if something is not right. We can take a look at outlier analysis, and then we'll take a quick look at how we might be able to use this data to even spot some cases of off-label spending. And lastly, one thing that goes beyond open payments is how do we look at prescription data tied with spend. So I'll take a look. I'll take a look at it. All of this is again with the theme of what keeps us up at night, right? And the question really is, we have the data. Why do we not know, right? So let me start with looking at how we can explore this and how easy it is. So this is Open Payments Analytics, our qordata's compliance platform, compliance analytics platform. And when you log in, you'll see a variety of pre-built dashboards to be used by compliance teams. As I think we've stated before, our platform works with all the major aggregate spend tools out there. So whether you're using Polaris, Medispend, Orzio, LexisNexis, or any of others, we take in input from them and can give you visibility into your spend, as well as the platform comes with all of 3 years of CMS data pre-built, so you don't have to actually look at tinkering with that data. So the first case that I identified was around, and just want to show you that the list of dashboards here is tremendous, so I'm not going to go into each one of those, but just teeing off from those 4 cases for compliance. One is around executive visibility. I'll start looking at that first and then go through the cases that we identified. So this is our executive summary type dashboard, and here I'll look for a company that we have created for demo purposes for pharma. And the idea here is within the system we have the 3 years of data available. Actually, let me pull up. We have 3 years of data available from CMS, as well as what we might add as part of our 2016 data set, right? So you want to be able to look at your spend across the 4-year period. In this particular scenario, we have 3 years data coming in from CMS, and 2016 data has been added. In this particular scenario, we've only loaded, for example, up to June. And we have the option to compare this data from both a year-over-year perspective or just year-to-date. So for example, if we're in the middle of 2016 and we only want to look at what the months in 2016 compare to the months in 2014 and 2015, and it gives us a quick visibility into the number of transactions, our R&D spend. And one thing you'll notice about this particular scenario is that we do see an increase in the number of transactions going into 2015. Both from an R&D and general spend perspective. And one thing to know about this company is they had some mergers and acquisitions, so that seems to be justified. But as we explore this further, we'll see if there's other cases that might be interesting from a compliance perspective to look at. Here I see the spend by specialty. I can click on dentistry as a spend, and then when I look at dentists, our spend seems to be high on the consulting side. And immediately when I'm looking at this, it seems like maybe 2015 we've spent something more than what we generally spend in this area. So I want to maybe dig a little bit deeper into the 2015 spend when it comes to dentistry. So I'm going to select this part, which is just the consulting fees, and I'm going to go into the company's physicians. As I look at the company's physician, I see a huge list, and in this scenario, as a compliance officer, I've put my investigative hat on, and I'm trying to sniff anything that doesn't look right. And I see a physician here where we didn't have a relationship with him in 2013 and 14, but suddenly we're spending close to 200K on him. in 2015. So I'm wondering if there is something going on here. I select this particular physician, I can go into that physician, and I see the individual transactions. That's one power of this analytic tool set, is you can start all the way up from your top summary KPIs and come down all the way to transactions. So as a compliance officer that is now getting used to analyzing and investigating data, I look at this and I see some transactions that don't seem to make sense. So I have a $23,000 spend both on that same day, 8th of January, to that same physician. So either I've accumulated and made two payments together, but as I go down, I see a similar pattern. I see a $26,000 transaction in 2015 that seems to be double booked. When I look at 2016 data, I see, however, a single transaction. So it seems like something happened with my 2015 data set, and I actually have double counting of all my transactions, right? So the idea here is when we start to investigate points, we can come down to specific scenarios, and as Ben said, this is where the hard part begins. Now you're able to export this as an Excel sheet, which you're most familiar with, and then you'll have to have communication with both your systems team as well as your compliance teams in terms of figuring out what's going on. So in the interest of time, since we only have 7 minutes left, I'm going to skip the outlier analysis because I think Ben covered portions of how to look at outlying meals, and so did Kelly. I'm going to look at some quickly on how we can determine off-label spending, or at least get a sense for when something like that might be happening, and then quickly move into a tie-in from open payments as well as the Medicare Part D data. So looking at the outliers. So for example, I want to investigate, my company is Core Pharma, and we have 5 drugs. Out of these drugs, and I have 5 subsidiaries, and I'm interested in actually looking at data from all of my subsidiaries. But in this case scenario, I can start to either select all and actually see the data across my 4 products and how I'm spending by specialty on different specialty types. And you can quickly see most of my drugs are urology, hematology, internal medicine. And in this case, I want to focus on one specific company and one specific drug. Curomycin is a drug that's for infectious diseases. So once I select data for curomycin, I quickly see infectious diseases comes up as a specialty where I spend the most. And some of these others make sense: internal medicine, critical care, hematology. But again, with my Sherlock Holmes hat on, as I'm going down this list, I see an interesting specialty that I did not expect, which is pediatrics. This drug hasn't been approved for use in children. What is going on here, right? So I select my pediatrics bars, and I can quickly see all the physicians that I've spent in pediatrics across the 3 years, right? And I look at this, and these seem to be small amounts, nothing too striking, small meals maybe. However, I see there is a payment of $4,000 that happened to this physician in 2014. So maybe this is something worth looking at, right? So I select, and of course we didn't have any spend on this physician either in 2013 or 15. So why are we spending on a pediatric physician, especially when this drug isn't approved for that purpose? So I go into the details of this physician, and I can quickly see that all the payments were made by my subsidiary for company on a single day, and they include travel, speaker services, and food and beverage. All of this makes sense, except his specialty doesn't make sense. So now as the next step, again, I'll do my drill, I'll export my table, and I'll send this out to 2 particular individuals within the organization that can help me determine what is going on, right? So one is my analyst in the compliance team that can look at the system, whether the physician is right, whether the specialty matches with the verified physician list that I have. And then I'm also going to send it to my marketing contact and validate whether this is a target physician or an anomaly in the system, right? So the idea again is you start with something very high level, and then you get down to the nuts and details, and then you move your analysis to something else, which might be your internal systems. So this is just an example of how you might look at something that appears fishy in terms of off-label. I have 3 more minutes, so I'll quickly go through another part that I think is interesting and also brought up by Ben. We've all known the recent example of Insys Therapeutics. One thing that was interesting about Insys is that the government chose not only to use the spend data, but also the Medicare Part D prescription data. So what we've done is, in this dashboard, put the two data sets together. So on the right hand, on the x-axis, you see the spend that's coming from open payments. The higher you go towards the right, the higher the spend. On the left, y-axis are your prescriptions from Medicare Part D data set. And each dot represents a physician that either you're spending or they're prescribing for you. The dots in the left-hand corner seems to be okay because, and of course you expect a majority of your physicians to be concentrated in this area where you have very limited spend and they're prescribing a little less. The ones that should scare you, or at least you need to start thinking about, are going to be the ones that are in the top right-hand corner where you have a high spend and then, and they're writing a lot of prescriptions for you, right? Whether that spend is creating that prescription writing is not something that, as an outsider, I would be able to determine. However, that's where the government or the feds will at least start their investigation. So for example, this is just sample companies, and I can quickly look through a few of those. But before I show you some of those, maybe we look at what happened in the case of Insys Therapeutics, right? Because we've mentioned that as a scenario. So if I look at the specific case of Insys, and I look at the same chart, I see the risk area being here, right? And the red dots are the ones that are actually the physicians that were mentioned in the suits, both the Fed and the state suits that were against Insys. So coming back to just the idea of how analytics can make it easy for you to look at some areas that might be of risk to your company, and you can resolve them with a few clicks. So for example, if I'm looking at another company called Core Pharma 3, I can quickly see that the analysis represents some physicians that are high risk for me to actually start to investigate, right? And I'll take a quick look at one of those here real quick. Something went wrong with my system. Okay, I don't know if I lost connection. Okay, again, the idea here is, as you look at, and by the way, I'm on time, so we'll continue this 5 extra minutes to take Q&A at the end, because we have several questions that have come in, and we want to have our panelists answer. Please stay if you can. If you have to leave, feel free to leave. The idea in this dashboard is you're able to see your spend against your prescriptions from Medicare Part D. So this is the same data set that government has access to, the public has access to, and the question we need to ask ourselves is why, as compliance officers, we're not looking at something very similar on this. So with that, I'm going to move towards a quick set of, actually, here this data set came up. So I'm looking at Q Pharma 3, and I can start to investigate a single physician if I wanted to, right? So my analytics has already highlighted a few physicians that are specifically of high risk. In this case, this physician, Thomas Paul, and I can go into his individual details and look at how I'm spending. So I'm Core Pharma 3. I'm almost 30% of the spend on this physician, but on the prescription side of the total prescription that he writes, he's writing almost 46% prescription against my drugs, right? And if I wanted to explore my own spend, right, so here's the total type of spend in terms of nature of payments on this specific physician, I can quickly look at what my spend constitutes. And when I'm looking at things like speaker and honoraria, maybe this is something that I need to investigate as a as a compliance member. And again, the collaboration and the initial view will come from here. However, the hard part of getting to the bottom of what is going on will require collaboration across teams. So with that, I wanted to end here and just move to the Q&A section real quick. We have a good set of questions. We won't be able to answer all of those right now. However, we'll at least ask our panel, based on the questions that have come in. So with that, I'm going to ask if we can, gentlemen, please, if we can unmute both Kelly and Ben. So the questions I have is, I guess it's both for you, Ben and Kelly, so maybe Ben, if you can go first. Do you know what is in your data? And do you, when you're looking at it, do you feel that, as the question around what keeps you up at night, do you feel that you have enough information on your data to sleep well? How do you answer that? Can we unmute Ben, please, first? Actually, both of them.
This is Kelly. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Kelly, I can hear you. Kelly, you can go first while they unmute Ben.
Okay. So as far as do I have enough information to not keep me up at night, I don't think I can ever say I'm not thinking of something else. I think the data and the software out there is now to show me what data I have and make sure I know that data. I'm 3 years into open payments. Am I still worried that there's some obscure data stream at one of my small SBUs that I'm not collecting? Yes, I am. I think resources is something that all of us deal with, or lack of what we feel are adequate resources for transparency. But as we continue to add more value through transparency reporting, I think it's getting visibility within the organization. I'm just never satisfied. I want to know that I have everything, and then I want to understand it, and I want to present it to others, and I want to make that data useful. But there are so many nuances, and we're in a stage where we've done quite a few acquisitions lately that I'm always worried we miss something. So I think people like Ben and I, who are active in the industry and are here today, always stay a little bit worried. I think if you get too complacent and say, yes, everything's perfect, that's when you open yourself up. So that's my 2 cents on it.
And this is Ben. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. I'll just exactly echo Kelly's sentiments. I don't think it's ever possible to get comfortable with the data. And it's because, simply put, we're not the owners of the data, right? Just like in a similar parallel, we're not the owners of business relationships, so how can we ever be comfortable with any risk associated with vendor activity? It's important for us, I think Kelly said it very well, not to be complacent, to analyze it, and I think it's just something that is innate in what we do and what our responsibilities are for the organization. But I don't think that it's ever going to change that level of comfort. With that said, I think it's also important to highlight the fact that what keeps, it's going back to the key question of this presentation, what keeps us up at night is the fact that the data, coming in does present challenges and present risks. And, try as we might to get ahead of the curve, it's a very difficult task, and difficult from a resource standpoint, difficult from an analysis standpoint, but just frankly, just very difficult just to be able to identify all the risk up front. And in some cases, you find yourself on the other end where you do disclose to the government and you have to work with them to create corrective behavior. I've seen that at a couple of companies where I've worked, and so that's just sometimes the reality.
Thank you, Ben and Kelly. I'll take 2 more questions, one for you, for each of you. One is for Kelly that came in. Kelly, how do you justify spend on analytics when budgets are tight, and specifically for compliance teams who are already very thinly stretched? That budget can potentially be utilized for some additional hands on deck to get the spend in shape, or some other functions in compliance? How do you go justify to your teammates in terms of the value that compliance can bring, analytics can bring to your compliance function?
I think the way I've been able to successfully justify it is to tie analytics to business uses and to our business team. Also, I've been able to show, in the pre-reporting stage and our data validation stage, how I could use analytics software such as qordata to cut down on manual work effort. In terms of compliance monitoring, as well as just what I would consider data validation, having tools, analytics tools, can cut down on the number of man hours as well as the number of people that you need to look at the data. Loading it into the software versus doing various Excel sorting and creating your own charts and graphs. I mean, the time savings is huge.
Thank you, Kelly. And then last question for you, Ben. How do we get started with analytics? And this question came in with the additional description, specifically when we still have challenges assembling data for submission. And my guess is there is a lot of organizations that are in that state where they still struggle to get to the March deadline, and in most cases don't have good data during the year to even start thinking about analytics. So what would be your recommendation, Ben, to organizations like that? How do they get started with analytics when they're still struggling with getting this spend accumulated?
Sure, I think that's a great question, and I can feel your pain because at small organizations I've been with, there is no budget and there is difficulty in getting that program started. I like what Kelly said. Piggybacking off of commercial or competitive activity. That's definitely one. But simply put, I'll just say analytics doesn't have to be the fancy visuals or the data programs that can compress. The analytics is more of a mindset, and I'm not trying to get too philosophical or anything. But if we think about analytics as a term in the school of thought, it's really just analyzing what you have already, right? And so in this particular question, if the organization has incomplete or inaccurate data or whatever it may be, that's a great starting point to develop a case study, right? To develop a key question, a hypothesis as to why our data is coming in so poorly or coming in at a bad time, right? Developing trend analyses or analytics around those types of metrics will help build the case for future use. I will say that it definitely, to be able to kind of create the visualizations that Kelly and I present today, it's a little bit unfair because we have budget, we have products such as qordata, and so on the one hand, I don't want that to be the perception that you have to have all these things to be successful. At the end of the day, what do we use the most here? We use Excel. We use Excel, and we take and we create analytics and visualizations and charts within Excel that can help drive risk mitigation activity. So it's a mindset. I think kind of the things that Kelly shared around the optimal analytics, as well as things that we talked about. I spoke on particularly in descriptive and diagnostic analytics. Just being able to frame that, find a key question or based on a risk, and creating a visualization, simply put, around that could help drive future use in the organization and future uptake.
Thank you, Ben. So just before we end, I think we came in today to learn a little bit more about how compliance function can benefit from analytics, and I think the presenters, both Ben and Kelly, helped us understand how analytics are being used in their organization and where exactly can analytics help, right? So we answered questions around, it can answer what's in your data, reduce the risk, detect questionable spend early, and of course, as Kelly mentioned, you can do more with less resources. So you, as listeners to this webinar, need to ask the question, would analytics be valuable to your compliance teams? And in case the answer is yes, and you want to move towards a journey, as Ben said, you have the option to start with Excel, but if you really want to look at all the data that's available out there published by CMS and the same data that the public and government have access to, we are offering a 30-day risk-free trial if you sign up with this, before end of September 30th and mention this webinar. We'll even load your 2016 data and show you how it looks so far. We'll give you multiple logins for your team so that you can collaborate with other departments, and we'll create one custom dashboard based on your requirements, all risk-free. If you don't like what you see after 30 days, feel free to turn it off. If you like what you see, we'll be happy to bring you on as a customer. So with that, I think we'll end this webinar. There's another webinar coming up in a few days, and we'll send you an email invite with that. With that, I want to thank Ben and Kelly. I apologize to the listeners. We went a little over time. We had some technical challenges. I hope you found the content valuable, and I hope we'll get to hear from you soon. If you have additional questions for both Ben or Kelly, please do send us an email, and we'll get those answered over email. Thank you so much.